Imagine stepping into London during the height of Queen Victoria's reign, around the 1850s, where the air itself felt heavy with soot, ambition, and secrets. The city was alive, enormous, and restless, a breathing machine powered by factories, horses, and human hope. Smoke curled endlessly from chimneys, fog rolled through narrow alleyways, and the Thames flowed thick and murky, carrying whispers of both fortune and filth. If you were to survive here, the first lesson was simple. London would not care who you were, only what you could endure. Its beauty was cruel. Elegant buildings lined the streets, while beneath them, tunnels and slums crawled with life unseen by polite society. The air smelled of coal, sweat, and rain-soaked cobblestones, and the sound of carriage wheels, boot heels, and factory whistles echoed like the city's heartbeat. Whether you were a nobleman in a fine waistcoat or a child sleeping under a bridge, London demanded the same price: resilience. Survival here wasn't about strength. It was about adaptation. You had to move with the rhythm of the city, learn when to speak, when to vanish, and how to eat without starving your soul. From dawn to dusk, London existed in layers. The wealthy lived high above the smog in grand townhouses with servants and silver spoons, their evenings filled with music and gossip. Below them, the working class fought for breath and bread, living in cramped tenements where families of 10 shared single rooms. At the bottom of this living pyramid were the forgotten beggars, pickpockets, chimney sweeps, and prostitutes, people who knew the city's alleys better than its streets. To survive Victorian London was to understand your place in this system, even if you hated it. The streets were both opportunity and trap. They could make you rich or swallow you whole. The city promised progress, but it demanded sacrifice. Factories offered wages, but took health. Workhouses offered food, but stole dignity. You could earn a living, yes, but only if you accepted that London owned you in return. It was not a city of mercy, only of motion. Stop moving, and you'd be forgotten by morning. If you were poor, your survival depended on cunning and luck. You rose before dawn, maybe to sell newspapers, sweep crossings, or shine boots for a penny. Every penny mattered. You learned to read faces faster than words, to spot kindness, danger, or opportunity in a single glance. Hunger made people desperate, and desperation made them clever. Children became messengers, thieves, or street performers. Women took laundry, sewing, or worse. Men labored until their backs broke. Meals were simple: stale bread, watered milk, perhaps a bowl of thin gruel if you were lucky. The rich might dine on roast beef and puddings, but the poor survived on scraps. And yet, for all its cruelty, London was intoxicating. Its energy could lift you up as easily as it crushed you. The gas lamps that glowed through the fog at night were more than lights. They were symbols of hope, tiny stars against the endless gray. For every tragedy, there was a triumph. For every thief, an inventor. For every beggar, a dreamer. To survive, you needed to know where to go and what to avoid. Avoid the Thames after dark, not just because of the stench, but because it was where secrets sank and bodies floated. Avoid St. Giles and Whitechapel, unless you wanted to lose your purse or your throat. But if you needed a meal, head to a soup kitchen near Clockenwell or a workhouse in Speed. If you needed warmth, find a public house or a penny sit-up, where for a coin you could sleep upright among strangers. Learn to blend in. The police, known as the peelers or bobbies, were more likely to arrest you than help you, especially if you looked poor. Crime was everywhere, but morality was selective. A starving child stealing bread was called a criminal, but a rich man exploiting hundreds in a factory was called an entrepreneur. Hypocrisy was the city's truest currency. The churches preached charity, but most of their pews were reserved for those who could pay for them. If you were lucky enough to have work, you'd find yourself in a world of noise and monotony. The Industrial Revolution had made London a machine, and you were one of its gears. Factory floors trembled under the weight of spinning looms, and the air was filled with the choking scent of oil and smoke. Workers lost fingers, eyes, or worse, but there were always others to replace them. 12-hour shifts were normal, and Sundays were sacred only because they offered exhaustion instead of labor. Women often worked as hard as men for half the pay, while children were prized for their small hands, perfect for cleaning under dangerous machines. Laws existed to protect them, but they were rarely enforced. Survival meant silence. Complaints could cost you your job, and unemployment meant hunger. Still, some found dignity in work, a strange pride in endurance, in knowing that they were the ones who kept London alive while others slept comfortably above them. The city itself was a paradox. Progress and poverty stood side by side. The Crystal Palace glittered as a monument to human achievement, while a few miles away, families coughed themselves to death in cellars too damp for rats. The streets smelled of horse manure, coal smoke, and humanity, a perfume only the desperate could endure. Yet, in this chaos, life bloomed. Street vendors shouted their wares: roasted chestnuts, ribbons, used books, second-hand shoes, filling the air with noise and color. Buskers played violins under gaslight, and newspapers sold sensational stories of crime and scandal. Entertainment was cheap, crude, and constant, from music halls to freak shows, from public hangings to penny drops. London was the world's greatest stage, and everyone played a part. For the newcomer, the key to survival was observation. Learn the rhythm of the crowds, the flow of the fog, the moods of the river. Trust sparingly, speak less, and walk quickly. The city had eyes everywhere, in its alleys, in its taverns, in the faces of strangers who remembered your business better than your name. But if you learned its ways, London could become your teacher. It taught cunning, endurance, and even compassion, the kind that came from knowing how fragile life could be. You'd begin to see beauty in strange places, in the reflection of lamplight on wet cobblestones, in the laughter of children chasing each other through the slums, in the smell of freshly baked bread wafting from a street stall at dawn. It was a beauty that came from survival, from the understanding that even in filth and fear, life insisted on shining through by nightfall. The city changed again. The working class retreated to their crowded rooms, the wealthy to their carriages and candlelit parlors. The streets filled with the footsteps of the forgotten pickpockets, drunks, and the women of the night. The fog thickened, and the gas lamps flickered like dying stars. Somewhere in the distance, Big Ben told the hour, its echo bouncing off the river like a warning. The city never slept, and neither should you. For those who couldn't afford a bed, the stone steps of bridges became shelters, their cold comfort a reminder that tomorrow might not come, yet somehow people endured. They laughed, they loved, they dreamed of better days. London, for all its cruelty, had a strange tenderness buried beneath its grime, a pulse of humanity that refused to die. To survive Victorian London, you didn't just need food or shelter, you needed hope. And in the thick of the smoke and sorrow, that hope, fragile, flickering, yet stubbornly alive, was the one thing no one could steal. In the heart of Victorian London, survival was not an act of luck, but a daily performance of strategy, endurance, and illusion. And if you wished to endure this monstrous city of fog and fortune, you had to master the delicate balance between blending in and standing out, between being invisible when danger lurked and noticeable when opportunity called. For the city was both your enemy and your teacher, testing your wit with every dawn and every downpour that turned its streets into rivers of filth and mystery. Imagine the morning mist curling through narrow lanes where market vendors shouted over each other, the clang of horseshoes on cobblestone echoing like the city's heartbeat, and chimney smoke thick enough to turn daylight into twilight. Here, your appearance was your first line of defense. A tattered coat too fine would invite suspicion. One too ragged would invite pity or arrest. Neither poor enough to be pitied nor wealthy enough to be envied, surviving instead as ghosts of the metropolis. The first rule of surviving London was simple: know the streets better than they know you. For in a place where thousands moved at once, anonymity could save your life. The second was to eat whenever food appeared, no matter how questionable its source. For hunger was the true tyrant of the age. Breakfast, for those lucky enough to have one, might be a crust of bread dipped in weak tea, or, for the working class, a meat pie that was more pastry than filling. Vendors sold these from steaming carts, shouting hot pies, eels, chestnuts, while the wealthy dined on eggs, smoked fish, and toast served by servants who had not eaten properly in days. The divide was enormous, yet both rich and poor shared the same air, thick, damp, and filled with the acrid perfume of industry. If you walked toward the docks, you would find the air laced with salt and decay. Sailors yelling in half a dozen languages as cargo ships unloaded goods from the colonies. Tea, tobacco, rum, sugar luxuries that most Londoners only smelled, never tasted. Children darted between carts, stealing bits of coal or fruit. And even the smallest act of theft was a gamble between survival and the gallows, for Victorian law was merciless. And prisons like Newgate or Pentonville loomed as grim reminders of how little it took to fall from grace. But still, people risked it, because in a city that offered so few chances, desperation was a kind of courage. As the day aged, London became louder and faster. Carriages rattled down Fleet Street, paperboys cried headlines of murder or scandal, and the clamor of commerce swallowed the cries of the poor. Workhouses opened their doors to the destitute, but inside, they were closer to prisons than shelters. Families separated, heads shaved, and labor demanded in exchange for thin gruel and a roof that leaked in the rain. For many, it was better to sleep in the streets than to surrender to such indignity. The fortunate found employment in factories, shops, or as maids and butlers in grand houses, their lives governed by the ticking of clocks and the expectations of those above them. A maid might rise before dawn, polish brass, scrub floors, prepare fires, and still be invisible to her employers, her name forgotten, though her work shone in every reflection of their mirrors. The men in factories breathed soot and spun cotton until their lungs ached, while others loaded ships or hammered metal until their hands bled. Yet, despite the misery, there was a strange pride in endurance, in knowing that each day survived was a small victory over a city that devoured the weak. If you were cunning, there were other ways to live. The alleys of Soho and Whitechapel were schools of the street. Here, thieves and tricksters taught survival as an art form. Children learned to pick pockets. Women sold flowers by day and secrets by night. And men became hawkers, gamblers, or storytellers, anything to earn a coin. The underworld had its own order, its own ethics. Loyalty and betrayal traded hands as quickly as money. The taverns were their sanctuaries, smoky rooms where laborers, crooks, and dreamers shared pints and rumors, where laughter could turn to violence in the blink of an eye. The smell of beer and sweat hung heavy, mingled with the faint sweetness of tobacco. And in these places, life felt raw but real. Music drifted from cheap fiddles, dice clattered against wooden tables, and the city's forgotten souls found momentary warmth in the illusion of belonging. For a few hours, they were not poor, not unwanted, just human. But to truly survive Victorian London, one needed more than cunning. One needed resilience of spirit. Illness was everywhere: cholera, typhus, tuberculosis, and the city's doctors were as likely to kill you as cure you. The poor could not afford medical care, so they relied on superstition, faith, and luck. Mothers tied charms around their children's necks to ward off disease, and apothecaries sold potions that promised miracles but delivered poison. Death was a familiar presence, stalking the alleys and workhouses with quiet patience. Coffin makers thrived, and graveyards overflowed, forcing the city to bury its dead in layers, sometimes 3 or 4 bodies deep. And yet, even among such decay, life went on. Lovers met in secret, children played in the filth, and preachers promised salvation to anyone who would listen. The human heart, it seemed, was the one thing London could not break entirely. Night brought both danger and wonder. As the sun sank, the gas lamps flickered to life, casting their golden glow through the fog like constellations of the earth. The streets emptied of workers and filled instead with shadows: the watchmen, the pickpockets, the wandering drunkards, and the women in red shawls who haunted the corners with practiced smiles. The city became a stage for whispers and sins, its true nature revealed under cover of darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a clock struck 10, and the sound mingled with the faint hiss of rain. The wealthy attended operas and masquerades, their laughter floating above the smog like music from another world, while the poor huddled by fires or slept under bridges, dreaming of bread and warmth. The Thames reflected the lights of both worlds, a dark mirror that united them in reflection, if not in fate. For those new to the city, the lesson was clear: London owed you nothing. It would not protect you, nor pity you. You had to carve your place within it, learn its moods like you'd learn the temperament of a wild animal. Trust was rare, but small kindnesses existed: a shared loaf, a blanket from a stranger, a smile in the market, proof that humanity still flickered beneath the soot. And if you survived long enough, the city began to reveal its rhythm, its cruel beauty, its strange poetry. you would see that survival here was not just about food or shelter, but about endurance of the soul, about finding meaning in the mundane, about holding onto your small joys, even as the city threatened to swallow you whole. The fog might blind you, the hunger might twist your belly, the loneliness might ache in your bones. But as long as you kept walking, kept breathing, you remained defiant, alive against all odds. Victorian London did not reward the good. It rewarded the persistent, those who refused to vanish, no matter how hard the city tried to erase them. And in that quiet defiance lay the true art of survival, a whispered promise that even in a world of smoke and sorrow, the human spirit could still find a way to shine. To survive in Victorian London was not only a matter of feeding your stomach or finding a roof over your head. It was a battle for dignity in a city that treated the poor as shadows and the wealthy as untouchable gods. Every morning began with the same ritual, the creak of iron shutters, the distant hum of church bells, and the slow stirring of millions of tired souls who had learned to rise even when life offered no reason to. The streets awoke with noise, the sound of boots striking against cobblestone, horses snorting in the fog, and market vendors setting up their stalls before dawn. Bread carts rattled down the lanes, leaving trails of flour in the air like ghosts of hunger, and the smell of baking loaves mixed with the sharper stench of sewage from the gutters. For the rich, mornings were quiet, breakfasts served in silver, letters read beside warm fires, their homes filled with music boxes and imported carpets. But for everyone else, life was a scramble. You had to fight for work, for food, for air, and even for a patch of ground to call your own. Dignity, for most, came in small doses: a clean collar, a kind word, or a rare day without hunger. The poor were everywhere, and London's polite society did its best to look away. On street corners, barefoot children sold flowers or matches, their tiny voices calling into the mist like birds lost in a storm. Women carried baskets of laundry on their heads. Men pushed carts piled high with coal, and the elderly begged quietly, their hands shaking as they extended empty bowls. Disease clung to the city like the fog. Cholera, smallpox, and typhus spread through the crowded slums, where 10 people might share one damp room. The Thames itself, black and oily, stank of death and waste. A river that had once been a symbol of life, now turned into a sewer. Still, the city refused to stop growing. New buildings rose, railways thundered overhead, and factories spat smoke into skies that no longer knew the color blue. London was expanding faster than its conscience, and its heart, somewhere between Parliament's proud towers and the slums of Whitechapel, beat with guilt and indifference in equal measure. To be poor in London was to be invisible, unless you were dying or committing a crime. The workhouses, created under the name of charity, were places of misery, where men and women were separated from their children and forced into labor for a crust of bread. Those who entered often never left, their lives reduced to numbers in dusty ledgers. The rich, meanwhile, took comfort in the illusion that poverty was a personal failing rather than a system they had built. Newspapers printed tales of thieves and beggars as cautionary stories, ignoring the reality that hunger was the true criminal. Yet, even among the poor, there was pride, the pride of endurance, the stubborn refusal to break. A chimney sweep covered in soot still whistled while he worked. A seamstress stitched with swollen fingers, but kept her posture straight. A beggar shared half his crust with a stray dog, because compassion, unlike wealth, could not be bought or stolen. Despite the hardships, life in the city carried a strange rhythm of hope. Sunday was the one day that felt almost holy, when the streets quieted, church bells filled the air, and families in rags gathered outside churches to listen to hymns they could barely afford to enter and yet still believed in. For a few hours, people remembered they were human, not just survivors. Parks became sanctuaries where laughter replaced the sound of coughing, and for children chasing each other through the grass, the weight of poverty seemed to lift, if only for a heartbeat. At night, however, that fleeting peace dissolved into shadows once more. The fog crept back in, the lamps flickered weakly, and the city exhaled its exhaustion like a tired beast. Crime stirred again, thieves prowling for purses, women offering company for pennies, and drunkards staggering through alleys that swallowed them whole. The constables patrolled with their truncheons and whistles. But even they knew that the city's darkness was not something that could be arrested. It was built into its bones. Yet within that darkness, there was brilliance, the resilience of the human spirit. You could find it in the street musicians who played violins with missing strings, their melodies echoing through the fog like prayers. You could see it in the factory workers who, despite their exhaustion, saved a penny here and there to buy a candle for reading, dreaming of something beyond the soot and smoke. You could even feel it in the laughter of children who made toys out of scraps, their joy a defiance against despair. The city was cruel, yes, but it was also alive, a paradox of beauty and brutality, where even in the worst conditions, people still reached for moments of grace. And that, perhaps, was the secret to surviving Victorian London, to find small pieces of dignity amid the dirt, to carry kindness even when the world offered none, and to hold tight to the fragile flame of humanity that the city tried so hard to extinguish. As the night deepened and the bells of St. Paul's Cathedral tolled across the river, London seemed to sigh a weary, endless exhalation that blended the dreams of the poor with the guilt of the rich. Smoke rose from chimneys, fog hugged the rooftops, and the distant hum of life never fully faded. The city did not sleep. It merely shifted form, its pulse continuing beneath the cobblestones, in the hearts of millions who endured its every cruelty and still woke to face it again. In the silence before dawn, when even the rats grew still, a faint promise seemed to hang in the air that tomorrow might be kinder, that the world might yet remember the forgotten, and that even in the dirtiest corners of London, light could still be born from darkness. To walk the streets of Victorian London was to step into a living organism of stone and smoke, a maze that pulsed with ambition and misery in equal measure, where every corner held a story and every shadow whispered a warning, and to survive in it required instinct as sharp as a blade. The city was a map written in contradictions. Wealth glittered in Mayfair drawing rooms, while hunger gnawed at the bones of children in Whitechapel, and between them flowed the ceaseless river of humanity that kept London alive. The streets were both arteries and traps, and you learned quickly that movement meant survival. Standing still was a luxury the poor could not afford. The air, thick with coal and fog, coated your lungs and your clothes with soot. And yet people kept moving, messengers darting between carriages, beggars clutching at sleeves, vendors shouting their wares in accents as diverse as the empire itself. If you wished to last even a day here, you had to master the art of reading the city's moods. For London, like a living creature, changed its temperament by the hour. Morning was loud with trade and work, noon shimmered with exhaustion, and night descended like a predator cloaked in mist. The first rule of survival was awareness, not of beauty or culture, but of danger. The streets looked harmless enough in daylight, lined with lamp-posts and shop fronts filled with curiosities. But beneath that surface was a network of desperation. Pickpockets worked in pairs, conmen disguised themselves as gentlemen, and the innocent learned quickly that trust was a luxury few could afford. The slums were especially treacherous, not because of malice, but because of need. Poverty forced people into choices that stripped them of innocence but not of humanity. Children were perhaps the cleverest survivors. They learned to spot a coin from 20 paces, to vanish into alleys when the constables came, and to charm strangers with eyes that had seen too much. They were London's orphans, its invisible citizens, darting between the legs of horses and through clouds of steam rising from iron grates. Many belonged to gangs, not by desire, but by necessity, where loyalty was enforced, not by affection, but by hunger for the working poor. The rhythm of survival was measured by the tolling of clocks and the chime of factory bells. At dawn, the fog lay low over the Thames, and the city stirred as thousands trudged to mills, workshops, and construction sites. The smell of bread baking mixed with the acrid scent of smoke, and the streets filled with the shuffle of boots. Wages were pitiful, but a job meant life. Men carried tools wrapped in rags, women balanced baskets on their hips, and children half their size marched beside them, faces pale under layers of grime. A factory shift could last 12, even 16 hours, the noise deafening, the air thick with dust, but no one complained. Complaints meant dismissal, and dismissal meant hunger. You could see entire families walking to work together, their silhouettes swallowed by the fog, their unity both heartbreaking and heroic. They worked for pennies, slept in rooms that smelled of damp straw, and ate meals that barely filled their stomachs, but their resilience was astonishing. They were the backbone of the empire, and though they received none of its glory, they bore all of its weight to survive. You needed to adapt, to learn the city's unwritten rules. Never draw attention unless you can defend it. Never owe money to the wrong people, and never, ever fall ill. Illness was the true executioner of the poor. The hospitals, when they existed, were overcrowded, filthy, and often fatal. Cholera and tuberculosis stalked the streets like unseen spirits, claiming thousands every year, their victims buried in mass graves with no names. If you caught a cough, you worked through it. If you broke a bone, you bound it yourself. Apothecaries sold colored bottles filled with promises, tonics for vitality, elixirs for pain. Most were nothing but alcohol or opium, but they dulled the ache of survival for a few precious hours. The wealthy, of course, had doctors who visited by carriage and medicines that came from abroad, but even they could not escape the city's filth. The same air entered every lung, the same water filled every pipe, and disease did not care for social rank. In this way, London was equalizing, but cruelly so. It made all its inhabitants vulnerable to its poisons. No matter how high their ceilings or how fine their curtains, yet despite its dangers, London was alive with opportunity for those clever enough to seize it. Inventors, artists, and dreamers flocked to the city, drawn by its energy and promise. The newspapers were filled with advertisements for miracle products, mechanical wonders, and new fortunes to be made in trade and industry. Steam engines hissed through the streets. Telegraph wires hummed with the pulse of progress, and new bridges connected the divided city in ways that seemed almost magical. But beneath this glittering surface lay the truth. For every person who rose, 100 fell. The factories consumed more than coal. They consumed lives. And yet, hope persisted, stubborn and radiant. People believed in a better tomorrow, in education, in reform, in the possibility that life might someday be fairer. It was that belief, more than anything else, that kept London running. The evenings were both beautiful and treacherous. As the sun dipped below the rooftops, the city began to glow. Gas lamps flickered to life, their light shimmering through the mist, casting long, soft shadows that made the streets look almost romantic. Lovers strolled along the bridges, whispering promises they could barely afford to keep, while elsewhere, men in bowler hats slipped into opium dens or secret gambling halls hidden behind respectable facades. Theaters came alive with music and laughter, their velvet curtains rising on dramas that mirrored the very lives their audiences sought to escape. And outside, beggars lined the exits, their hands extended to those whose hearts might be softened by a night of entertainment. The contrast was endless. Dizzying beauty and ugliness intertwined so tightly that you could not have one without the other. If you were new to London, it would overwhelm you, its noise, its smell, its enormity. But in time, you would learn to love it, because even in its filth and cruelty, it was alive in a way no other place could be. The city breathed, it spoke, it tested you. It taught lessons through hardship, compassion through pain, wisdom through exhaustion. And for those who managed to survive long enough, it offered something even more precious than wealth, belonging. You became part of its rhythm, its vast, unending story. The same streets that once frightened you would start to feel familiar. The same fog that once blinded you would begin to feel like a blanket. You would find kindness in strangers, laughter in poverty, and hope in the smallest gestures. That was the paradox of London. It was heartless, yet full of heart. It broke people, yet built them too. It was a city that demanded everything but gave back meaning, if not mercy. As midnight approached, the city seemed to exhale, its energy softening into a restless calm. The carriages slowed, the last taverns emptied, and the street lamps flickered in the mist. Somewhere far away, the bells of Westminster tolled, marking another day survived. The fog rolled in from the river, wrapping the sleeping city in a cold embrace. And the faint sounds of the night, footsteps, whispers, the distant cry of a newborn mingled with the sigh of the wind through narrow streets. If you stood still long enough, you could feel the pulse of London beneath your feet, ancient and eternal, as though the very cobblestones remembered every story, every struggle, every breath ever taken upon them. And if you listened closely, you might almost hear it whisper back, survive, endure, belong. To truly understand how to survive in Victorian London, one had to look beyond its dirt and danger, into the hidden rhythms of its people, their habits, their fears, and the strange ways they coped with a life so full of contradiction. Beneath the city's smoke and grime lived millions who had mastered the art of endurance, creating small rituals of hope to make existence bearable. Every class had its customs, from the grand lords who sipped tea under chandeliers to the chimney sweeps who coughed black soot before dawn. The upper classes spoke often of propriety, dignity, and moral virtue, yet many of their so-called standards were masks for control and image. They lived by rules of etiquette so rigid that even laughter had to be measured, and yet, behind closed doors, those same refined men and women indulged in behaviors they would publicly condemn. The Victorian home, for all its polished silver and embroidered curtains, was often a theater of secrets. Servants knew it best, for they moved like ghosts through hallways, witnessing affairs, rivalries, and hypocrisies whispered through silk-covered walls. For the poor, life was more honest, if harsher. There was no pretense of grandeur, only the simple truth. Their homes, often one-room tenements, crammed with entire families, smelled of coal and damp straw, but they pulsed with life and laughter, even in misery. Children played with makeshift toys, mothers sang lullabies while mending clothes, and neighbors shared food even when they barely had enough for themselves. Food itself revealed much about Victorian society's contradictions. The wealthy feasted on lavish multi-course meals that could last hours: turtle soup, roast pheasant, jellied eels, puddings soaked in brandy, and rivers of port wine. Dining was not just about eating, it was a performance of refinement. Forks had to be held a certain way, conversation had to follow strict etiquette, and even servants had their own choreography to maintain the illusion of effortless grace. Meanwhile, the working class lived on bread, dripping, and weak tea. Meat was a luxury. Potatoes, porridge, and cheap gin were staples. In the poorest districts, food vendors roamed the streets with trays of whelks, pies, and questionable sausages that might have contained more mystery than meat. Yet, even in their hunger, the poor were resourceful. They knew how to stretch every coin to reuse, repair, and reinvent what others discarded. The city's refuse became their marketplace. Old clothes mended and resold, broken toys repainted for another child, and scraps of food turned into hearty stews that could feed a family. There was a quiet dignity in their endurance, a shared understanding that life, though cruel, could still be lived with pride. The idea of cleanliness fascinated Victorians, though few truly achieved it. Soap was expensive, water often polluted, and yet cleanliness was next to godliness, had become a moral creed. The upper class bathed with perfumed water and boasted of their porcelain tubs, while the poor relied on public bathhouses, or more often, a quick scrub in a tin basin. Still, London had its own unique scent, a blend of horse manure, smoke, sewage, and sweat, so pervasive that even the finest perfumes could not mask it. Ironically, that same filth fueled the cleaning industries. Chimney sweeps, street sweepers, laundresses, and night soil men who collected human waste from cesspools all made their living from dirt. These were the invisible laborers who kept the city from drowning in its own excess, though few would ever be thanked for it. Then there was fashion, perhaps the most absurd, yet fascinating obsession of the Victorian era. Clothes were not just garments, but symbols of identity and morality. A woman's corset spoke of her virtue, a man's top hat of his respectability. But fashion was also a form of suffering. Women endured suffocating corsets that reshaped their bodies, layers of skirts that trapped heat and grime, and shoes so tight they deformed feet. Men, too, were trapped in their own uniforms, stiff collars, heavy wool coats, and endless layers, meant to display status rather than comfort. Yet fashion also served as rebellion. In the streets of East London, working women began wearing simpler dresses. Men rolled up their sleeves, and young people invented a rough, defiant style that would later inspire the street fashion of future generations. Even then, London was setting the trends that the rest of the world would one day follow. Social life in the city was a curious performance of class and illusion. The upper classes gathered at balls and opera houses, discussing art and politics under glittering chandeliers, while pretending not to see the poverty outside. Newspapers printed endless columns about manners and morality, lecturing the public on propriety, while ignoring the fact that half the city lived without sanitation or security. The poor, on the other hand, found entertainment in simpler pleasures: street musicians, storytellers, puppet shows, and the lively noise of taverns where laughter drowned out despair. The music halls were the true heart of working-class joy, filled with songs that mocked the rich and celebrated the stubborn humor of the poor. There, for a few hours, class disappeared, and everyone could laugh, drink, and forget the weight of their troubles. Religion also played a strange role in survival. The churches preached compassion, but often judged the poor more harshly than they helped them. Some preachers spoke of sin as the cause of poverty, while others genuinely tried to offer charity and hope. Missions and soup kitchens became sanctuaries for the desperate, where faith was served alongside bread. And yet, for many Londoners, belief had less to do with heaven and more with endurance, a quiet trust that if they kept going, if they kept believing in the smallest flicker of good, life would somehow find balance again. The Nights of London revealed another layer of its soul. As darkness fell and the gas lamps flickered, a different city awoke, one of whispers, desires, and danger. Streetwalkers drifted along the foggy alleys, offering what little they could to survive, their painted faces glowing faintly in the lamplight. Policemen patrolled in pairs, their footsteps echoing on wet cobblestones, while thieves and gamblers worked in the shadows. Opium dens and gin palaces became refuges for the hopeless, where pain could be numbed for a few shillings. But even here, humanity persisted in shared cups, in fleeting kindness, in the silent understanding that everyone, no matter their path, was simply trying to survive. To live in Victorian London was to balance between morality and madness, dignity and despair. Yet, despite its contradictions, there was beauty in its struggle, a beauty born of resilience, of lives carried forward by sheer willpower and faith in tomorrow. The people of London, from the ragged child selling matches to the weary mother sewing late into the night, all shared one truth: life was hard, but giving up was harder. And so they endured, building the rhythm of the modern world with every exhausted breath. The city changed them, but in return, they gave it a soul, vast, complicated, and unforgettable. Surviving Victorian London was an art form, a daily performance on a stage of soot and sorrow, where every decision could mean the difference between life and ruin. And yet millions learned the unspoken rules that kept them alive amid the chaos. The city was a living organism, loud, hungry, and merciless, and those who wished to endure it had to learn its pulse, its secrets, and its moods. Rule 1 was simple: never stand still. The streets devoured those who hesitated. You had to move, to chase work, to dodge danger, to stay one step ahead of hunger. At dawn, the first wave of workers surged from the slums like ants leaving a nest. Men trudged toward the docks, factories, and foundries, their boots soaked in gutter water, while women hurried to laundry houses and workrooms, their shawls pulled tight against the biting cold. The fog was their constant companion, thick, damp, and alive, swallowing whole streets until even the most familiar alley became a maze. Within that haze, people vanished, some swallowed by poverty, others by crime, and many by despair. The survivors were those who learned to read the fog like a map, to know which corners promised safety and which ones whispered danger. Rule 2: trust no one too quickly, but never live without allies. London's heart beat on favors and whispered deals. A dockhand might share his bread with a fellow laborer one day and steal his boots the next. A kind word from a shopkeeper could mean the difference between hunger and a meal. But kindness was often a luxury few could afford. The poor relied on fragile networks of loyalty: a neighbor who watched your child, a friend who saved you a crust, a stranger who warned you when the constable was near. These were the invisible bonds that stitched the city together. The wealthy, on the other hand, had their own kind of alliances: social clubs, secret societies, and parlors where influence was traded like currency. Behind the polished doors of Mayfair, gentlemen plotted business deals over cigars, while their wives hosted tea gatherings that decided the fate of reputations. In both worlds, survival depended on knowing when to speak, when to listen, and when to vanish quietly before trouble found you. Rule 3: appear respectable, even if you are starving. In a city obsessed with appearances, the illusion of decency could open doors that hunger alone would close. A clean collar could make a beggar look employable. A steady gaze could make a thief look trustworthy, and a quiet tone could save you from suspicion. The poor learned this early. Even the dirtiest child would wipe his face before begging, and even the hungriest man would straighten his coat before entering a shop. Respectability was armor, a disguise that fooled the unforgiving eyes of society. For women, this rule was even crueler. A single tear in a dress or a misplaced word could brand her forever. Those who worked as seamstresses, governesses, or maids lived on the edge of ruin. One mistake, one rumor, and they would be cast out, forced into the streets where judgment was harsh and mercy rare. Yet they carried on, heads high, clutching their pride as tightly as their worn gloves. Rule 4: learn to navigate both daylight and darkness. The London of sunlight and the London of gaslight were two different worlds entirely. By day, order ruled: policemen on patrol, merchants shouting prices, children darting through the crowds. But when night fell and the fog thickened, morality blurred. The respectable disappeared behind curtains, and the forgotten emerged. The alleys came alive with whispers, the clink of gin bottles, the shuffle of boots, the murmurs of deals struck in the shadows. Prostitutes, pickpockets, and gamblers were not merely criminals. They were survivors, adapting to a city that gave them no other choice. The police did what they could, but corruption ran deep. Many constables turned blind eyes for a few coins, and some even worked hand in hand with the very criminals they were meant to catch. The city, in truth, was an ecosystem of sin and survival, and those who lasted longest were those who understood its balance. Rule 5. Never let despair show on your face. Misery attracted vultures, employers who paid less, landlords who demanded more, strangers who took advantage. Even when life broke you, you had to pretend it hadn't. The strongest Londoners wore invisible masks, smiling through hunger, laughing through loss, and walking with purpose even when their feet bled. In taverns and markets, laughter was often louder than truth, a kind of rebellion against hopelessness. People told jokes about death, sang songs about poverty, and clung to humor as their last defense. In a strange way, laughter was survival itself. It reminded them that they were still alive, still human, even when the city seemed determined to grind them into dust. Rule 6. Adapt or die. London was changing faster than anyone could understand. Machines were replacing hands, railways were tearing through old neighborhoods, and money flowed like water, but only in one direction. Those who failed to keep up were left behind. A craftsman who refused to learn new tools became obsolete. A small shop crushed by department stores faded into memory. Yet for those clever enough to adapt, opportunity existed even in chaos. Street vendors turned into shopkeepers, beggars became performers, and former thieves became detectives. The city rewarded wit and punished hesitation. Every street corner, every whisper of gossip, every job posting was a chance if you were brave enough to seize it. Rule 7. Believe in something, anything. Faith, love, luck, superstition. Call it what you will, but without belief, London would crush you. The churches offered one kind of salvation, the taverns another. Some people clung to crosses, others to cards or charms. Superstitions ran deep, crossing paths with a black cat, hearing church bells at midnight, seeing fog roll backward across the Thames. All were taken as omens. But beneath the rituals lay a simple truth. Belief gave people reason to wake up each morning. It was the invisible fire that kept their hearts beating when everything else had turned cold. In the end, the true secret of surviving Victorian London was understanding that the city itself was not the enemy. It was a mirror. It reflected human nature in its purest form: greed, ambition, cruelty, and compassion tangled together like the alleys that wound through its heart. It punished weakness but rewarded courage. It destroyed dreams but also birthed them. For every child who starved, another learned to read. For every man who fell into crime, another rose to fame. The city did not care who you were. It cared only that you kept moving. The survivors were not the strongest or the richest, but those who could endure, adapt, and hope in the face of endless struggle. As dawn broke once more over the smoky skyline, the bells of St. Paul's echoed across the rooftops, and the city stirred like a beast waking from restless sleep. The fog lifted slightly, revealing men sweeping the streets, women carrying baskets to market, and children chasing after carriages with laughter that defied the gloom. Life went on imperfect, exhausting, but unbroken. Victorian London, for all its filth and fear, was alive with stories of survival, sacrifice, and stubborn hope that refused to die. The streets of Victorian London were not merely pathways, they were veins through which the city's lifeblood flowed, thick with smoke, sweat, and secrets, pulsing with the rhythm of survival and sin. To walk them was to dance with danger, to breathe in a mixture of opportunity and filth, to feel both awe and fear at the scale of humanity crammed into one restless metropolis. From dawn to midnight, London's streets told stories that history books often dared not record, of thieves and merchants, beggars and bankers, saints and sinners, all existing within a few feet of one another, each feeding off the other in the strange dichotomy of desperation. The morning began with the roar of markets, carts creaking under sacks of grain, fishmongers shouting prices over the smell of the Thames, and butchers hacking away at meat that would feed the rich or the rats, depending on who paid first. Barrow boys sold roasted chestnuts, rag pickers scoured refuse heaps for scraps of cloth or bone, and costermongers, the street vendors of the working class, hawked fruit with cries that echoed down the alleys. The city seemed alive, a living creature that never stopped moving, feeding, and changing shape. But beneath this energy lurked a darker truth. Survival was a trade, and everyone had something to sell: their labor, their dignity, or their soul. In the shadow of St. Giles and Whitechapel, the underbelly of London thrived. It was a world unseen by those who dined in gilded halls, a labyrinth of alleys where sunlight rarely reached, and justice came only to those who could pay for it. The rookeries, as they were called, were neighborhoods of decaying buildings packed so tightly that one could pass a stolen loaf of bread from window to window without stepping outside. Families lived in rooms the size of coffins, and rats scurried over sleeping children. Yet even here, life persisted, loud, chaotic, and strangely organized. The slum dwellers had their own economy. Thieves sold stolen goods to fences, who in turn bribed the police to look away, while women ran illegal gin shops out of basements where laughter often mixed with sobs. The air was thick with the scent of unwashed bodies, burning coal, and cheap alcohol, but also with the sound of resilience, babies crying, fiddles playing, and the steady hum of life refusing to die. The poor might have been abandoned by society, but they were not defeated. They built their own order out of chaos, their own currency out of trust and necessity. Theft was an industry in itself, so vast that it almost seemed respectable. Pickpockets, or dippers, roamed the crowded thoroughfares of Covent Garden and Fleet Street, their fingers quicker than the law. Children as young as 6 were trained by older criminals, taught to cut pockets, snatch watches, and vanish into the crowds before a shout could be raised. The flash language of the streets, a secret slang, allowed them to communicate without being understood by outsiders. A good pickpocket could earn more in a day than a factory worker in a week, but the risk was always the same. One mistake, one wrong grab, and it was off to Newgate prison, or worse, the gallows. Yet even in this criminal world, there were strange codes of honor. Thieves who shared their spoils with the poor were celebrated, and informers were despised as the lowest form of life. The law itself was inconsistent. Some constables were brave, others corrupt, and many too afraid to patrol certain streets after dark. Justice was a luxury the poor could rarely afford. But not all of London's darkness was criminal. Much of it was simply economic. Factories belched smoke into the sky while paying pennies for labor. And children worked 12-hour days in spinning mills and match factories where the fumes ate away their teeth and lungs. Women stitched until their fingers bled. Men hauled coal until their backs broke. And when the work was done, they returned to damp cellars to sleep among vermin. Death came easily, whether by disease, hunger, or exhaustion. Yet the city grew richer every day. The Industrial Revolution had made London the beating heart of an empire, a place where fortunes were made and bodies were spent to make them. The divide between rich and poor was not merely visible. It was tangible, like a wall of iron running through every street. A carriage might roll past a beggar dying on the pavement, its wheels splashing mud onto his rags, while inside, a lady in silk gloves discussed the price of diamonds. The newspapers wrote about progress and prosperity, but those who lived in the rookeries knew that for every mansion built in Mayfair, 10 families starved in the East End. The night was when the city revealed its truest self. As the sun set and the fog thickened, London transformed into something otherworldly, beautiful, dangerous, and hypnotic. Gas lamps flickered like fireflies through the mist, casting long, trembling shadows that seemed alive. The streets filled again, but with different kinds of people, the desperate, the broken, and the bold. Prostitutes stood at corners beneath the faint glow of lamps, their laughter thin and brittle. Drunks staggered out of taverns, singing off-key, while constables tried in vain to maintain order. Thieves, gamblers, and beggars moved like spirits through the haze, slipping in and out of alleys that seemed to swallow them whole. The pubs and gin houses overflowed with noise, laughter, shouting, and the clink of coins being lost and won. In the smoke-filled rooms, deals were struck that could change a man's fate in an instant. A lucky bet could make him rich. A wrong word could get him killed. It was a world of constant risk, but for many, it was the only life they knew. And yet, amid all this darkness, there was beauty, the strange, haunting beauty of survival. The lamplighter walking his route in the fog, leaving a trail of glowing orbs behind him. The sound of a street musician playing a mournful tune on a violin, his bow moving with the rhythm of passing footsteps. The baker's boy carrying trays of hot bread through the cold, the scent mingling with the smoke. Even the slums had their moments of grace. A mother washing her child's face with cold water, whispering lullabies as if to keep the world's cruelty at bay. Neighbors sharing a meal, scraped together from scraps. Lovers holding hands in secret under the archways of Blackfriars Bridge, dreaming of a life they knew they'd never have. In those fleeting moments, the city's harshness softened, and the people who endured it became more than victims. They became symbols of defiance. The greatest irony of Victorian London was that it was both the symbol of progress and the proof of its failure. Steam engines, telegraphs, and grand exhibitions dazzled the world, yet half the city's children went to bed hungry. Moralists preached purity and virtue while turning a blind eye to the brothels that lined their own streets. Philanthropists gave speeches about charity while their factories paid starvation wages. It was a city built on contradictions, where light and shadow existed side by side, where hope and despair were indistinguishable in the fog. To survive, one had to learn to live with those contradictions, to find balance on the edge of madness and morality. For those who endured it, the city became a test of strength, of spirit, of soul. The poor learned to smile through suffering. The workers learned to dream between shifts, and the forgotten learned to exist in silence. London devoured many, but it also forged a kind of humanity that could not be broken. The same fog that hid crime also hid compassion. The same streets that echoed with cries also echoed with laughter. In that tension, in that fragile coexistence of misery and meaning, Victorian London became not just a place, but a symbol of everything both magnificent and monstrous about being human. Victorian London was a machine powered not by steam alone, but by the countless invisible hands that kept it alive, men, women, and children whose labor filled the spaces between progress and poverty, whose sweat lubricated the gears of empire, even as their own lives rusted away in silence. Beneath the grandeur of the British Museum, beneath the ringing of Big Ben and the glimmering shop fronts of Oxford Street, there was an underground kingdom of laborers who built, cleaned, hauled, scrubbed, and stitched the city into existence. They were the heartbeat of London, yet the city preferred not to see them, just as the wealthy preferred not to imagine who had touched the silk of their curtains or washed the soot from their marble floors. To survive as one of these invisible workers required more than strength. It required endurance, cunning, and a capacity for hope that bordered on madness. Every morning began with the same gray light filtering through smog, the clang of factory bells, and the shuffle of thousands heading toward another day of toil. Coal dust floated through the air like black snow, settling on rooftops, on skin, and in lungs. Even the sunrise seemed tired. Its rays filtered through the smoke of endless chimneys that exhaled the city's exhaustion in the textile mills of Spitalfields. The hum of machinery was so constant it became a kind of music, a mechanical lullaby that drowned out thought. Women bent over looms for 12, sometimes 14 hours a day, their hands blistered, their eyes strained, their minds somewhere far beyond the rattling of spindles. Children, some no older than 7, crawled beneath machines to clean them while they still moved, because stopping production was unthinkable. Fingers were lost, hair was caught, lives were crushed, yet the machines kept running, and so did the workers. A single day's wage might buy a loaf of bread and a candle, and still they came back the next morning. To them, exhaustion was not a symptom, but a condition of existence. For laundresses, the work was no kinder. Bent over steaming tubs from dawn till night, their hands red and raw from lye, they toiled in cellars filled with damp air and dripping ceilings. The sound of water sloshing, of scrub brushes grinding against cloth, was the rhythm of their days. Some sang to keep themselves awake, others simply worked in silence, saving their voices for prayer. Up above, the streets echoed with the cries of other workers, dustmen collecting refuse, coal porters staggering beneath heavy sacks, chimney sweeps clambering up narrow flues that could easily become coffins. These were the boys who blackened their lungs before their voices even changed. Small enough to wriggle through the soot-choked chimneys of mansions that gleamed with the illusion of cleanliness. A sweep's cough was a sound Londoners heard daily but rarely noticed. Yet those same boys, covered in ash and bruises, were part of the city's rhythm. So were the costermongers, who shouted their wares in sing-song voices, fresh apples, hot pies, the street musicians who played for pennies, and the flower girls who wove beauty into a world of grime. The poorest found poetry in survival, and sometimes that poetry was the only luxury they had. The docks along the Thames were another world entirely, a kingdom of noise, muscle, and danger. Ships arrived from every corner of the empire, bringing tea, spices, and silk for the rich, and endless labor for the poor. Dock workers unloaded cargo for hours on end, their backs bent beneath the weight of barrels and crates. They were paid by the day, sometimes by the hour, and if work ran out, they simply waited in lines that stretched along the wharves, hoping for a chance to earn enough to eat. The smell of tar and salt mixed with that of sweat and ale, and the river itself seemed to sigh beneath the weight of commerce. London was the center of the world's trade, but its riches flowed in one direction, upward. For every pound earned in the counting houses of the city, 10 hands bled to make it possible. Still, the men on the docks laughed, cursed, and sang, because laughter was cheaper than despair, and a good curse could make even pain sound like defiance. The servants of London's great houses lived another kind of invisible life, one of constant obedience and carefully hidden exhaustion. Behind every grand drawing room and banquet table was an army of maids, cooks, butlers, and footmen who existed in perpetual shadow. They rose before their masters and slept after them. Their days measured not by clocks, but by bells that summoned them at every whim. A knock at the wrong time, a wrinkle in a sheet, or a misplaced spoon could cost them their livelihood. Yet even within this strict hierarchy, there were moments of quiet rebellion, a whispered joke in the scullery, a stolen bite of dessert, a glance exchanged between two servants across the table as the gentry dined in oblivious splendor. For many, service was both a cage and a sanctuary. It offered food, shelter, and the faint illusion of stability. But the cost was freedom. The grand homes of London gleamed with chandeliers and mirrors. Yet in those reflections, the servants did not exist. Meanwhile, the city's underpaid teachers, nurses, and clerks formed a fragile middle ground, too educated for the slums, too poor for comfort. They lived in constant anxiety, trapped between respectability and ruin. A single illness, a lost job, or a missed rent payment could send them tumbling into poverty. Still, they clung to small rituals of pride, polishing shoes until they shone, mending clothes until they resembled new, and writing letters with careful grammar as proof that they still belonged to the world of aspiration. For them, survival was not just physical, but social. Dignity was a form of armor, and appearances were their only currency. Beyond all of this, London's women bore the heaviest burden. For every respectable wife in Kensington, there were hundreds of single mothers, widows, and working girls fighting simply to exist. Many turned to sewing or laundry, others to the streets. The city judged them all the same, harshly. Morality was a privilege of those who could afford it. Yet, women formed the quiet backbone of London's survival. They raised children, buried their dead, kept their homes, and endured hardships that would have broken the men who dismissed them. In whispers and small kindnesses, they built networks of solidarity that kept entire neighborhoods alive. A loaf of bread shared, a baby watched while the mother worked, a candle lit for a friend lost to fever. These acts, invisible to history, were the true miracles of the Victorian age. The final layer of the city's labor force was its children, the street urchins and factory boys who were the true symbols of industrial London. Barefoot, ragged, and hungry, they darted through crowds, selling newspapers, sweeping crossings, or stealing just enough to stay alive. They slept in doorways, on rooftops, or beneath bridges, dreaming of warmth they might never find. Some were taken in by charitable missions or workhouses, but those places often offered cruelty instead of care. Children were cheap labor, easy to exploit, easy to replace. Yet, even among them, hope refused to die. They formed their own gangs, their own families, their own stories of courage. A single loaf, shared between friends, was an act of loyalty, deeper than any law. Through all these layers of struggle, London's machine never stopped. The factories clanged, the ships arrived, the carriages rolled, and the people endured. The city's power came from those who asked for nothing but a chance to live. And though their names were never recorded in history books, their hands built everything, from the cobblestones beneath the Queen's carriage to the iron that shaped the bridges spanning the Thames. Without them, the city would have collapsed. Yet they were ghosts, glimpsed only in the corners of memory, their lives buried beneath the progress they sustained. There was something magnificent in their anonymity, a collective strength that made London more than its wealth, more than its empire. It was their sweat that made the lamps burn brighter, their hunger that drove innovation, their resilience that gave the city its soul. And though the world above rarely saw them, the echoes of their footsteps filled every alley and square, every echo of the city's heartbeat. To survive as one of London's invisible workers was to live unseen but indispensable, to find meaning not in recognition but in endurance, in the quiet between the clang of machines and the toll of church bells. One could almost hear it, the sigh of a city built on human strength, a melody of survival that no smoke could choke and no poverty could silence. London in the mid-19th century was not merely a city. It was a breathing organism, pulsing with life and disease, filth and resilience. Every brick and every puddle carried the signature of progress and decay existing side by side, an urban paradox that glittered in candlelight while stinking beneath the surface. To survive in Victorian London was not only to find food and shelter, but to battle the city itself, its air, its water, and its very streets that seemed to swallow the unwary whole. The smell alone was a force of nature, a living, suffocating thing that wrapped around every passerby and lingered in every home. By 1858, this miasma had reached biblical proportions. The summer heat intensified the rot, and the Thames, once a proud artery of trade, turned into a vast sewer of human and industrial waste. They called it the Great Stench, but it was more than that. It was London's collective breath turned against itself. The rich fled behind drawn curtains and soaked their drapes in vinegar to keep the odor at bay, while the poor had no such luxury. They lived with the stench, as one lives with grief, constantly, intimately, unavoidably. The Thames was the city's mirror, reflecting not only the sky, but the consequences of unchecked growth. Into it flowed the effluence of millions human waste, horse dung, factory runoff, rotting animal carcasses, and the refuse of every conceivable trade. It was said that a single drop of Thames water held more life than the ocean. But most of it was invisible, microscopic, and deadly. Cholera stalked the streets like a ghost, striking without warning, reducing healthy men and women to corpses in hours. Theories about its cause ranged from divine punishment to poisonous air, but few suspected the water itself. When Dr. John Snow traced the outbreak to a single pump on Broad Street, it was a revelation born of tragedy. And yet, even then, change came slowly. People were reluctant to believe that something as common and necessary as water could kill. But for the poor, there was no choice. They drank what was available, and they died quietly, buried in shallow graves that filled faster than they could be dug. To walk the streets of London was to test one's endurance. The cobblestones were slick with filth, the gutters running with rain, refuse, and worse. Ragged children picked through the muck for anything that might sell, scraps of coal, bits of cloth, the occasional lost coin. Horses pulled omnibuses and carts through narrow lanes, their droppings mixing with mud to form a sludge that could swallow boots whole. The noise was relentless. Iron-rimmed wheels clattering, hawkers shouting, bells ringing, the constant cry of "mind your step" echoing through the din. Yet in this chaos, the city had a strange rhythm, a vitality that made it impossible to look away. Londoners learned to navigate it as fish learned to swim through murky water. They adapted because there was no alternative. Even the rats thrived, fat, bold, and numerous, scurrying through cellars and sewers, as much a part of the ecosystem as the people themselves. In the poorer districts, such as Whitechapel, Bethnal Green, and overcrowding reached inhuman levels. Entire families lived in single rooms, their beds shared in shifts to accommodate night workers and day laborers. Walls wept moisture, ceilings dripped, and the air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and stale smoke. Disease did not discriminate, but poverty provided the perfect breeding ground. Typhus, tuberculosis, smallpox, all flourished in the tenements, their spread aided by ignorance and despair. Yet somehow, life continued. Babies were born in those same rooms, laughter echoed down the narrow alleys, and people found ways to celebrate even in misery. There were street fairs, penny theaters, and markets where colors and smells dazzled the senses. Oranges from the docks, cheap gin from the stills, fried eels sizzling in pans. It was a carnival of survival, chaotic and miraculous in equal measure. The city's sanitation reforms began with outrage and necessity. The great stench had forced Parliament to act when even the lawmakers themselves could not bear the odor wafting through the open windows of Westminster. Engineers like Joseph Bazalgette became unlikely heroes, designing vast networks of sewers that would transform the city beneath the surface. Miles of brick-lined tunnels were laid by hand, curving like veins beneath the metropolis. The work was dangerous and exhausting. Laborers waded waist-deep through muck, risking gas explosions and collapses. But they persevered, driven by wages and a strange sense of purpose. When the system was completed, London began to breathe again, not cleanly, not completely, but enough to survive. The river, though still dark and sluggish, ceased to be an open wound. it became once again a mirror, this time reflecting the possibility of redemption. Yet even as the sewers carried away waste, they also carried away history. The filth of generations was sealed beneath brick and mortar, buried like a secret no one wished to remember. But the smell lingered in the memory of the people, a reminder that civilization is always balanced, precariously atop its own decay. For the street dwellers, the change was barely noticeable. Their struggle remained the same, finding food, avoiding disease, and staying alive through the bitter winters. Public health improved, but poverty did not vanish. Soap and clean water were luxuries in the East End long after the pipes were laid. The divide between rich and poor was as visible as the fog that rolled across the Thames, thick and impenetrable, swallowing sound and light. Fog itself became a symbol of the Victorian city, both beautiful and deadly. It softened the harsh outlines of reality, turning gas lamps into halos and filth into mystery. Poets romanticized it, painters captured it, and criminals used it as a cloak. On certain nights, the fog was so dense that people could not see their own hands. Carts collided, pedestrians vanished, and the city seemed to dissolve into a dream. Yet for those who lived by labor or crime, the fog was both friend and foe, a place to hide, but also a place to lose oneself forever. The police patrolled with lanterns held high, their calls muffled by the mist. And in that ghostly silence, London felt less like a city and more like a living creature, exhaling its own secrets. In wealthier districts, survival took on a different shape. There, the battle was not against disease, but against scandal. Respectability was a fortress built on appearances, and one misstep could mean social death. Ladies fainted at the mention of bodily functions, even as the stench of the city seeped through their perfumed carriages. Gentlemen discussed progress and philanthropy over cigars, unaware or unwilling to admit that their fortunes were built on the backs of those who lived and died in the slums. It was a city of masks, where truth was an inconvenience best ignored. And yet, beneath the hypocrisy, something extraordinary was happening. Out of filth came innovation, out of suffering came reform, and out of the city's stinking heart rose a determination to create something better. Writers and thinkers turned their attention to the plight of the poor, their words igniting conversations that would shape the modern age. Dickens walked the streets at night, observing and recording, his pen a weapon against indifference. The public began to see, slowly, that the misery of the many endangered the comfort of the few. Sanitation, education, and housing became rallying cries, though progress came in inches, not leaps. Still, each inch mattered. Each reform, each law, each act of kindness chipped away at the darkness. By the century's end, London had begun to transform, still vast, still grimy, but alive with possibility. And through it all, the people endured. The laundresses still scrubbed, the dock workers still hauled, the sweep boys still climbed, but their children dreamed new dreams. The fog lifted more often now, replaced by clearer skies and cleaner streets. Yet, in the quiet hours of dawn, when the city was half asleep, the ghosts of the old London still whispered from the shadows, the voices of those who had lived and died so the city could rise. They spoke of the river's stench, of the hunger that never left, of the endless will to survive. Their legacy was not written in monuments or plaques, but in the very air London breathed. To live in Victorian London was to walk the edge between progress and peril, to witness the miracle of human endurance played out daily on streets that could both nurture and destroy. The city was cruel and magnificent, deadly and divine, and for those who survived its worst, who inhaled its filth, braved its darkness, and still managed to find beauty in a candle's glow, there was no greater victory. London was not kind, but it was alive, and so were they. As dusk descended upon Victorian London, the city transformed from a smoky hive of labor into a glittering theater of light and shadow, a place where gas lamps flickered like captive stars along cobbled streets, and where the heartbeat of the empire pulsed through its taverns, theaters, and darkened alleys. When the sun dipped below the horizon, London's double life began, elegant and sordid, refined and depraved, the same city reflected in two mirrors that refused to show the same face. To survive the night here required not just awareness, but instinct, because once darkness fell, morality blurred like the mist rising off the Thames. The gaslight was both guardian and deceiver. It revealed beauty even as it hid danger. It illuminated wealth even as it deepened the shadows of poverty. Along the Strand, gentlemen in fine coats strolled arm in arm with ladies in silks, their laughter blending with the rattle of carriages and the distant cry of street vendors hawking roasted chestnuts. Opera houses glowed like jewels, their entrances alive with chatter and perfume, while just a few streets away, in the labyrinth of Whitechapel and Soho, the same light flickered over cracked windows and doorways that led to rooms filled with gin, music, and desperation. Nightlife in Victorian London was a spectacle built on contradiction. The wealthy sought diversion, the poor sought escape, and both found it in the same intoxicating mix of noise, smoke, and possibility. Music halls were the grand cathedrals of entertainment, where laughter drowned out the sorrow of the working class. Inside, the air was thick with tobacco and sweat, the stage lit by rows of gas jets that hissed like serpents, and the audience roared at bawdy songs and comic sketches that mocked the very society they depended on. Performers, draped in feathers and sequins, sang of love, loss, and liquor, their voices defiant against the monotony of survival. For a few hours, the factory girl and the banker could forget the boundaries of class and lose themselves in the same applause. But outside the hall, the divisions returned with brutal clarity, as if the city itself demanded a price for every moment of joy. The pubs and gin palaces were the true heart of London after dark, places where lives intertwined and unraveled in equal measure. The gin craze of the previous century had evolved into something more contained but no less potent. The working man's solace came in pewter mugs, his despair drowned in cheap spirits that burned like liquid fire. Women, too, found refuge in Gin Mother's Ruin, they called it, a cruel nickname for something that offered warmth when nothing else did. The pub was not merely a drinking place, it was a gathering point, a place where news was traded, songs were sung, and sorrows confessed. Its walls held more truth than any newspaper. The barmaids were queens of this world, skilled at balancing flirtation with authority, aware that charm was often the only defense against unwanted hands and unpaid bills. Behind the laughter and music, there lingered a constant edge of danger, fights that erupted without warning, debts that led to ruin, police raids that could shatter a night in seconds. Yet the people came, night after night, drawn by the same hunger that drove the city itself, the need to feel alive. If only for a while. Not all of London's nightlife was public. Behind locked doors and discreet curtains, private clubs catered to those who could afford secrecy. Gentlemen's clubs on Pall Mall offered brandy, cigars, and political gossip, their interiors filled with velvet chairs and self-import. Meanwhile, in hidden basements and back streets, gambling dens buzzed with tension. Dice clattered, cards shuffled, and fortunes changed hands beneath the glow of smoky lamps. Respectable men risked everything in moments of greed or desperation, while those with nothing to lose played simply for the thrill of existing one step ahead of ruin. Prostitution thrived in these shadows, not as a profession of desire, but of necessity. The fallen woman became both a social caution and an unavoidable reality. They stood beneath the gaslight with painted faces and hollow eyes, their laughter brittle as glass. Society condemned them in daylight, yet relied on them in darkness, an hypocrisy as old as civilization itself. For women who worked the streets, survival was an art form. They learned to read danger in footsteps, to measure safety by the tone of a stranger's voice. Some found protection through brothels, where madams enforced their own brutal order. Others walked alone, vanishing into alleys from which they might never return. The East End became infamous for its darkness, not only literal but moral, the kind of darkness that bred monsters like Jack the Ripper, whose murders would later stain London's memory forever. But even before the killings began, fear haunted those streets. Every rustle, every whisper carried a threat. Yet the women stayed, because hunger was more certain than death. In this world, morality was a luxury, and survival was its own virtue. Beyond the vice and the violence, there was also wonder in London's night. Theaters offered Shakespeare and new plays alike, attended by audiences hungry for meaning. Gaslight transformed the stage into a living dream, and for a few hours, one could believe in anything: love, redemption, escape. The city's intellectuals and artists met in smoky cafes to debate philosophy, politics, and poetry until dawn, their conversations shaping revolutions of thought. Elsewhere, in the parks and on the bridges, lovers walked hand in hand beneath the stars, their breaths mingling in the cool night air. Even the poorest found romance in the city's nocturnal rhythm, a stolen kiss in a doorway, a whispered promise before partying at sunrise. London at night belonged to everyone, though it offered each person a different story. For those with nowhere to go, the night was a test of endurance. Homeless men and women huddled in doorways, wrapped in newspapers or thin blankets, while the watchmen made their rounds. The city offered no mercy. Its chill cut through bone and pride alike. Charitable missions provided soup and scripture, but beds were few, and compassion had conditions. Still, even in this bleakness, humanity persisted. Strangers shared crusts of bread. Mothers rocked babies to sleep beside dying fires. And somewhere, a drunk hummed a tune that echoed faintly through the fog. The night, for all its cruelty, held a strange kind of peace, the peace of exhaustion, of knowing that dawn would come whether one was ready or not. As the hours passed, the gas lamps burned lower, their flames trembling in the breeze. Carriages gave way to costermongers, setting up for morning, their carts piled high with produce. Milkmaids called out in sing-song voices, and the city began to wake again, its sins briefly washed clean by the pale light of dawn. The respectable world reclaimed the streets, sweeping away the evidence of its nighttime double life. But the echoes remained. Laughter from a distant tavern, a dropped glove on the cobblestones, the faint scent of gin and roses mingling in the air. London's night was gone, but never truly ended. It lived on in memory, in gossip, in the quiet ache behind tired eyes. To survive Victorian London's nightlife was to accept its contradictions, that beauty and decay could exist in the same breath, that pleasure was often born from pain, and that the city's true face revealed itself only after sunset. It was a place of masks and mirrors, of yearning and despair, where every flicker of gaslight promised both wonder and warning. And yet, for all its danger, it was also alive in a way the daylight world could never be. For some, the night destroyed. For others, it offered the only freedom they would ever know. Behind the soot-streaked windows of Victorian London's endless rows of terraced houses, a quieter struggle unfolded, one not of grand revolutions or dark alleys, but of daily survival within the walls of the home. The world imagined the Victorian household as a place of order and virtue, where the wife ruled with grace and the husband with stern authority. But the truth was far more complex. Steeped in weariness, silence, and endurance, domestic life was both sanctuary and prison, a microcosm of the empire's hypocrisy, where respectability mattered more than happiness, and appearances were a form of armor. From the grand drawing rooms of Kensington to the cramped kitchens of Whitechapel, every home was a battlefield fought with different weapons, duty, pride, and the endless work of keeping chaos at bay. To survive Victorian London's domestic world was to live inside a performance that never ended, to balance affection and obligation while hiding despair beneath the calm rhythm of the ticking clock. For the middle-class family, the home was an extension of reputation. Cleanliness, decorum, and moral restraint were as vital as bread and coal. Every chair had its place, every curtain was drawn at the correct hour, and every sound within those walls carried meaning. The ideal home was meant to be a haven from the filth and corruption of the city outside. Yet it often reflected that same struggle. The dirt scrubbed away each morning, only to return with the evening fog. The mistress of the house bore the weight of this illusion. She rose early, ensuring the servants were at their duties, that the fires were lit, and that breakfast appeared without effort. Her days were a ceaseless ballet of supervision, her smiles rehearsed, her exhaustion disguised beneath layers of lace and propriety. A stain on a tablecloth or a chipped teacup could feel like a moral failure. The pressure to maintain gentility was relentless, for a woman's success was measured not by her joy, but by the order of her household and the obedience of her children. Behind the gentle hum of domesticity was an unspoken anxiety, the knowledge that one misstep, one scandal, could unravel everything. For the servants who made this domestic order possible, life was another world entirely. They were the city's invisible workforce, bound to the rhythms of their employer's comfort. In great houses, servants' bells rang constantly, shrill reminders of hierarchy that echoed through narrow corridors. A maid's day might begin before dawn, scrubbing floors and polishing silver, and end long after midnight, once the last lamp had been extinguished. There was no true rest, only the quiet between commands. Wages were small, mistakes unforgivable, and privacy non-existent. Yet within these constraints, servants formed their own communities, whispering gossip in the scullery, sharing secret kindnesses, and sometimes dreaming of escape. Some found strange pride in their work, a sense of dignity in perfection, a well-laid table, a spotless floor, a dress pressed without wrinkle. But the gulf between upstairs and downstairs was immense, and respect did not cross it easily. To the masters, servants were tools. To the servants, the masters were both livelihood and torment. Yet both were trapped by the same system, playing roles in a social play that neither had written. For working-class families, the home was less about appearances and more about endurance. A single room might serve as kitchen, bedroom, and parlor all at once, its walls damp and its floor uneven. Coal dust-coated every surface, and the smell of the street seeped through the thin walls. Still, families made do. Mothers cooked simple meals over small fires, children played in alleys, and fathers brought home their wages when they had them. Rent was a constant worry, and landlords were merciless. A missed payment could mean eviction with no warning, possessions thrown into the street, and no recourse but the workhouse. Yet even here, amidst poverty, there was love, humor, and resilience. Women mended clothes by candlelight, men told stories after long shifts, and children, dirty and laughing, found joy in scraps of freedom. The working-class home was not a symbol of order, but of resistance, a place where people refused to give up despite everything that conspired to break them. Children, whether in rich or poor homes, occupied an uncertain place in this domestic hierarchy. The Victorians revered childhood as an ideal, yet few children experienced it as such. In wealthier families, they were treated like fragile ornaments, dressed in miniature finery and confined by endless rules. Their lives revolved around education, manners, and moral instruction, with affection often hidden behind discipline. In poorer homes, childhood was short. The moment a child could work, they did in factories, on the streets, or as apprentices to trades that would wear them down before adulthood. Yet, whether reading primers by the firelight or sweeping chimneys before dawn, Victorian children shared one commonality. They were shaped by duty, born into a world where obedience was both expectation and survival. And within that obedience, they learned early that life was less about fairness than endurance. Marriage itself was another form of survival. For women, it was often the only acceptable path to security. To remain unmarried was to invite pity or suspicion. To be widowed was to risk ruin. A woman's legal identity dissolved into her husband's the moment vows were spoken. The angel in the house ideal celebrated her devotion but erased her individuality. Yet not all marriages fit the mold. Behind closed doors, many women carved small spaces of power, managing finances, raising children, and steering households with quiet authority. Some even found companionship and love amid the rigid expectations. Others lived in quiet misery, trapped in loveless unions, or under the cruelty of drunken or abusive husbands. with no legal recourse. Respectability demanded silence, and silence became a way of life. The very walls seemed to absorb secrets, the arguments, the tears, the desperate prayers whispered before sleep. Among the poor, marriage was less about ceremony and more about survival. Couples often lived together without the luxury of formal vows, their bonds forged in necessity rather than church sanction. These unions, though condemned by polite society, were often stronger for their honesty. They were partnerships in the truest sense: shared labor, shared hunger, shared endurance. Women washed, cooked, and cared for children while men worked the docks, the factories, or the streets. When tragedy struck, and it often did, neighbors stepped in, forming networks of mutual support that the upper classes could never comprehend. Love in these homes was not fragile or poetic. It was practical, stubborn, and enduring. Domestic life in Victorian London was also shaped by the relentless march of industrial progress. New technologies, sewing machines, gas lamps, running water, promised comfort, but came slowly and unequally. For most, modernity was something glimpsed in shop windows or read about in papers. The reality remained grimy and exhausting. Housework never ended. It simply began again each day. The Victorian home was a place of constant motion: washing, scrubbing, mending, cooking, cleaning, tending, repeating. Even those with servants lived surrounded by labor, their comfort built upon the toil of others. And yet, within that endless cycle, people found meaning. The polished teapot, the tidy hearth, the freshly ironed shirt. These were small triumphs, proof that chaos could be tamed, however briefly. Religion played a powerful role in domestic survival. Prayer was both habit and hope, the quiet voice that sustained millions through hardship. Bibles sat beside every bed, verses read aloud before sleep, as if words alone could shield against hunger or grief. Sunday was a day of rest in name only. For many women, it simply meant more work, dressed in cleaner clothes. But faith provided structure, and structure meant sanity. Even those who questioned God rarely questioned the need for order. It was what held the fragile illusion of respectability together. As the century drew on, reformers began to peer inside the walls of the working-class home. Journalists and philanthropists wrote with both compassion and condescension, describing the poor but respectable with fascination. They sought to improve conditions, better housing, sanitation, and education, but their charity often carried the weight of judgment. Yet, despite outside interference, the essence of domestic survival remained unchanged. It was a private war fought daily by millions of unseen hands, mostly women's, who held the line between life and collapse by candlelight. When the city's noise faded into distant hums, London's homes revealed their truest selves: a mother whispering a lullaby over a cradle, a father staring silently into the fire, his hands blackened by work, a servant slipping into bed for a few hours of sleep before dawn. These moments, small and unseen, were the heartbeat of the city. The empire's strength did not come from its factories or its palaces, but from these quiet rooms where people endured, loved, and hoped against all odds to survive domestic life in Victorian London was not to live peacefully, it was to master the art of persistence. Every day was a performance of respectability, every meal a victory, every clean sheet an act of rebellion against the filth outside. Behind closed doors, amid the ticking of clocks and the creak of floorboards, millions of stories unfolded, stories of fear, pride, tenderness, and strength. These homes, humble or grand, were the unseen foundations of a world that demanded endurance. Victorian London was not only a city of innovation and empire, but also one of secrets, shame, and silent endurance. Behind its iron railings and polished boots existed a labyrinth of hidden lives where people fought battles that society pretended not to see. To survive in such a world meant learning to move quietly, to live between what was said and what was done, to understand that every smile might conceal exhaustion and every act of charity might carry a whisper of judgment. London's gaslit streets glowed with progress, but beneath that light, shadows stretched long, filled with whispers of debt, sickness, forbidden love, and private grief. Respectability was the armor everyone wore, yet beneath it lay bruises of every kind. For the Victorians, survival was not only about food, warmth, or shelter. It was about maintaining the illusion of decency in a world where moral failure could destroy a life faster than hunger ever could. Within the walls of countless homes, secrets were as common as soot. A husband drank away his wages and told his wife he was working late. A seamstress, earning pennies a day, hid her child's hunger from her employer for fear of losing her place. A clerk falsified a ledger to pay for his mother's medicine. These small acts of desperation were not villainy but survival, quiet rebellions against a system that demanded virtue, while offering no mercy. The more respectable a family appeared, the heavier its secrets tended to be. Letters were burned before dawn, debts were hidden from neighbors, and reputations were guarded like gold. A ruined name was a social death sentence. One whisper could end a career, a friendship, or even a future marriage. So people smiled, bowed, prayed, and lied, not out of malice, but out of necessity. Hypocrisy became the city's hidden currency, exchanged in glances, gestures, and polite conversation. Women bore the heaviest burden of these double lives. Society demanded purity and obedience, yet survival often required defiance. A widow might take in a secret lodger to pay the rent, or a young maid might find herself forced to choose between starvation and the attention of her employer. These realities were rarely spoken aloud. Respectable women pretended not to see, and respectable men pretended not to know. The few who fell from grace, those labeled fallen, became invisible overnight. No one asked how it happened. The city simply turned its back. Yet within those forgotten lives lay untold courage. Many of these women built quiet networks of care, helping one another with food, shelter, and the kind of compassion society refused to give. Their existence was a rebellion against the cruelty of respectability, a reminder that morality without mercy is only another form of injustice. Even among the upper classes, sin wore fine clothes. Gentlemen who preached virtue by day visited the darker corners of the city by night, slipping through fog to indulge vices they would never name in daylight. Gambling dens, opium houses, and secret clubs flourished in the spaces where silence was bought and morality was suspended. Behind the velvet curtains of elite salons, whispers of scandal lingered like perfume. Affairs, debts, and double lives were carefully hidden beneath layers of etiquette and lace. The difference between sin and respectability was not virtue, but discretion. The same society that condemned the poor for immorality quietly practiced its own in secrecy, protected by wealth and influence. For the working poor, sin was often a luxury they could not afford, yet temptation was everywhere. The stress of endless labor, the hopelessness of poverty, and the desire for escape led many to the bottle. Gin, cheap and potent, became the comfort of the desperate. Taverns and alehouses glowed warm and inviting in the cold, offering brief oblivion from hunger and humiliation. The government tried to curb drinking with moral campaigns, but as long as misery existed, gin would always have customers. The same was true of gambling and theft. The city's underworld thrived because the world above offered so little. Yet even those who strayed from the path rarely lost their humanity. A thief might steal bread and share it with a friend. A drunk might spend his last penny on a hot meal for a child. Morality, in the end, was far less black and white than Victorian society claimed. Mental anguish, what Victorians called melancholy, hysteria, or nervous collapse, haunted the city as much as physical poverty. Life in London was harsh, and few escaped. The relentless pressure to appear respectable crushed many spirits. A clerk who worked 12 hours a day might fall into despair, his mind unraveling in silence because to admit weakness was shameful. A housewife might collapse from exhaustion and be told she suffered from female nerves. Doctors prescribed rest, tonics, or asylums, but understanding was rare. Madness was feared, hidden, and misunderstood. The insane were sent away, their families erasing their existence with forced cheerfulness. Behind closed doors, many wept quietly, praying for relief that never came. The city itself seemed to feed these invisible illnesses, its noise, its crowds, its endless demands, turning minds brittle under the strain. And yet, even here, survival persisted. People learned to smile through sorrow, to pray through pain, and to endure what could not be cured. Religion, the moral backbone of Victorian life, offered both solace and suffocation. For many, faith was genuine comfort, the one stable thing in a world of uncertainty. Churches were not only places of worship, but of refuge, charity, and community. The hymn echoing through a cold chapel might be the only moment of peace in an otherwise unbearable week. Yet, religion also reinforced the social hierarchies that kept people in their place. The rich gave alms to the poor, not as equals, but as benefactors. Salvation was measured by obedience as much as belief. The sermons preached humility and restraint, virtues easily demanded by those who had never gone hungry. Still, faith endured because people needed it. In the endless fog of London, belief in heaven made the streets bearable. The city's obsession with appearances extended to death itself. Funerals were grand performances of grief, complete with black horses, velvet drapes, and solemn processions. Even the poor, who could barely afford food, saved for proper burials. To die without ceremony was the ultimate shame. Undertakers thrived, offering payment plans for coffins and mourning clothes. Cemeteries filled rapidly, their headstones standing in neat rows, silent witnesses to the city's constant churn of life and loss. But beneath those stones lay the truth. In the end, every class, every secret and every struggle met the same fate. Death was the great equalizer the Victorians feared and revered in equal measure. And yet, amid all this sorrow and secrecy, there was still beauty. In the smallest gestures, a candle lit in prayer, a mother's lullaby, a neighbor sharing bread, the true heart of Victorian London beat quietly. The city's survival did not rest in its grand buildings or royal processions, but in its people's stubborn capacity for hope. They lived within contradictions, moral but flawed, oppressed yet resilient, miserable yet kind. They endured hunger, loss, injustice, and hypocrisy, but they never stopped reaching for something better. Theirs was not the romantic London of novels, but a living, breathing struggle of souls who refused to be defined by their suffering. To survive Victorian London's hidden world was to understand that life was not a moral lesson, but a daily negotiation between dignity and despair. Respectability was a mask. Compassion was the only real virtue. Behind every curtained window, every whispered conversation, and every tired smile lay a story that would never be told. Stories of ordinary people who carried extraordinary burdens in silence. They did not seek glory or pity. They sought only to endure. And in that endurance, there was greatness. Victorian London was a city alive in every sense of the word. A sprawling organism powered by human labor, ambition, and an unyielding will to survive. And yet, beneath the glimmering facade of progress lay a network of streets, alleys, and workplaces where the fight to live was relentless, often invisible and rarely kind. To walk those streets in the early morning meant to witness the awakening of a city that never truly slept, where the clatter of hooves on cobblestones mingled with the cries of street vendors, the low hum of factory machinery, and the coughs of those already choking on smoke, dust, and exhaustion, each sound a note in the symphony of urban survival. Laborers emerged from crowded tenements, their faces drawn and hands calloused from the endless demands of their work. Children joined their parents in factories or workshops, and women began their ceaseless rounds of cooking, cleaning, and mending, all before the gas lamps had even dimmed. While the wealthier classes moved through their mornings with ease, unaware that the luxury of comfort was built upon the sweat and sacrifice of those who would never see such privilege. In the markets, costermongers shouted over each other, hawking fruit, vegetables, and meat that would be sold for pennies to the hungry crowds. Their voices harsh and raw from exhaustion, but necessary for survival. Dockworkers labored tirelessly to unload ships heavy with goods from across the empire. Coal, dust, and salt water coating their skin, their hands raw from rope and iron, while street sweepers cleaned the gutters just enough to prevent disease, their brooms moving rhythmically in tandem with the city's heartbeat. Factories were the engines of London, where men, women, and children performed repetitive and grueling labor, often in deafening conditions, with looms clanging, hammers striking, and steam hissing, filling the air with smoke and oil that clung to hair, skin, and lungs alike. Injuries were common, from crushed fingers to lost eyes, and the air was thick with the suffocating mix of chemicals and sweat. Yet the workers endured, knowing that each day without effort meant hunger for themselves and their families. The textile mills of Spitalfields, the printing presses of Fleet Street, and the iron foundries near the docks all bore witness to the same pattern: relentless work, meager wages, and fleeting moments of rest that could barely be called sleep. Women in factories bent over machines for hours on end, their backs aching, their eyes strained, their hands blistered, yet they worked with quiet resilience, finding companionship in shared struggle, whispered jokes, and small acts of solidarity that no employer could see or acknowledge. Children, some not older than 6 or 7, performed the most dangerous tasks, crawling beneath machinery to clean it while it still operated, or carrying heavy loads along crowded streets. Learning early that survival demanded courage, cunning, and endurance beyond their years, the streets themselves were arenas of constant vigilance. Paved with uneven cobbles and slick with mud, horse dung, and rain, they were as dangerous as the factories. Pedestrians navigated a maze of carts, carriages, and the occasional runaway horse, their eyes scanning constantly for threats, both large and small. Street urchins darted between legs, selling newspapers or matches, their faces smeared with soot, their voices hoarse, while beggars crouched near doorways, their eyes pleading, their hands extended, hoping for a coin, a scrap of bread, or a drop of compassion. In this chaos, every movement was calculated. Survival depended on agility, awareness, and an unspoken understanding of the city's rhythms. To falter, even briefly, could result in injury, theft, or worse. The city was alive with dangers, not only physical, but social, and those who walked its streets daily became masters of reading its subtle cues: the shift of a cart, the glance of a policeman, the call of a hawker, the shadow in a doorway. Domestic labor formed another layer of the city's survival matrix. In wealthier homes, maids, cooks, and butlers labored invisibly to maintain the illusion of gentility, their days structured around the whims of their employers, bells ringing constantly to summon them from kitchens, laundries, or bedrooms, their own needs always secondary to those they served. In the poorest homes, women worked ceaselessly at cooking, cleaning, and mending, often sharing small rooms with children and elderly relatives, while men labored in factories, docks, or workshops. Food was meager, yet mothers found ways to stretch it into meals that could sustain bodies and spirits, turning stale bread into nourishing porridge, or combining scraps into stews that offered warmth and sustenance. Cleanliness was a constant battle against the grime that seeped from the streets, and illness was an ever-present threat, with fever, cholera, and typhus lurking in every corner. Even as the city modernized, with improved water systems and sewer networks, the reality of daily survival for the poor remained harsh and unforgiving. Transportation was another challenge. Omnibuses and horse-drawn cabs ferried passengers through congested streets, yet these vehicles were often overcrowded, unsafe, and expensive for the working class. For most, walking was the only option, and the journey to work could take hours, navigating narrow lanes, crowded bridges, and uneven pavements, all while carrying tools, goods, or children. The city's fog and mist added another layer of danger, obscuring vision, hiding hazards, and muffling sound. Navigating these conditions required vigilance and endurance, a daily test of skill and awareness. Those who mastered it gained a form of quiet respect, while the unwary or unlucky fell victim to accidents, theft, or exposure. Education offered a glimmer of hope, but was fraught with difficulty. Schools existed, but many children only attended sporadically, pulled out to work, care for siblings, or fetch water. Instruction was strict and rote, focused on reading, writing, arithmetic, and moral lessons. Discipline was harsh, punishment was swift, often physical, and compassion limited. Yet literacy and numeracy provided a path to slightly better work, a foothold above the grinding poverty, and for some, the hope of escape from the cycle of labor that defined their parents' lives. Teachers themselves worked under difficult conditions, often underpaid and overworked, carrying the burden of shaping minds while navigating the same social constraints as their students. Religion and community also played vital roles in survival. Churches, chapels, and mission halls offered spiritual guidance, small acts of charity, and a sense of belonging in a city that often seemed indifferent to individual suffering. Clergy and volunteers distributed bread, soup, and clothing, and provided moral instruction. Yet they also reinforced societal hierarchies, emphasizing obedience, humility, and deference. Mutual aid networks formed among neighbors, offering assistance with childcare, work, and illness, creating a social fabric that allowed life to persist despite the relentless pressures of the city. Festivals, fairs, and markets provided moments of celebration and relief, allowing people to reclaim joy, if only temporarily. In an otherwise demanding environment, the very architecture of the city reflected the contrast between wealth and survival. Grand townhouses, museums, and government buildings towered over narrow alleys, tenements, and slums, creating a visual and social hierarchy that reinforced the disparities in power and opportunity. Wealthy families dined on imported foods, wore fine clothing, and attended theaters, while their laborers lived in crowded, dark rooms, working endless hours to maintain the very standards admired from above. Yet the city thrived precisely because of this labor. Its machinery, markets, and institutions depended on human effort that was often invisible to the privileged. By mid-morning, the streets hummed with activity. Peddlers hawked their goods, apprentices delivered messages, factory whistles signaled breaks and shifts, and the air was alive with energy, sound, and motion. The city's rhythm was relentless. Those who could not keep pace were left behind. To survive in Victorian London meant constant adaptation, resilience, and awareness, a negotiation between strength and endurance, cunning and morality. Those who mastered the rhythm found ways to navigate hunger, exhaustion, and social pressure, carving out niches of relative stability. Others fell victim to accident, disease, or despair, their lives recorded only in official registries or whispered memories. Through it all, hope persisted, often quietly, often stubbornly. A mother saved coins for her child's education. A worker found moments of laughter in shared hardship, and communities formed bonds that transcended poverty. The city, for all its cruelty, offered opportunities to endure, to improve, and occasionally to rise. Victorian London demanded toughness, patience, and ingenuity, but it also rewarded ingenuity, courage, and solidarity. Survival was a constant, intricate dance, a blend of instinct, labor, and quiet defiance against forces too large to resist individually. In the final hours of the morning, as the city approached noon, the true pulse of London was revealed. Smoke and steam rose into the air, markets thrived, children returned to workshops, and the machinery of empire continued to hum. The invisible workers, the domestic laborers, the street vendors, the dockhands, and the children all played their roles in the vast urban organism, sustaining life and maintaining the illusion of progress. Their endurance, often unnoticed, was the foundation upon which the city stood. The grandeur of Westminster, the spires of churches, and the opulence of the wealthiest homes depended entirely on the pay. In the sprawling maze of Victorian London, survival was defined less by ambition or desire, and more by the ever-present threats of hunger, disease, and the constant struggle to exist within a city that could be as lethal as it was magnificent. Each day began with uncertainty as the working poor rose from crowded rooms, damp with condensation and smoke, to navigate streets slick with mud, horse dung, and refuse, where every step carried the potential for injury or theft, and every corner held the invisible menace of disease that preyed equally on the weak and unsuspecting. Hunger was an unrelenting companion, gnawing at bellies from dawn to dusk, shaping behavior, decisions, and morality itself. Mothers stretched stale bread into meager meals, adding water, gruel, or whatever scraps were available, while children scavenged alleyways for discarded fruit, vegetables, or bones that might be boiled into soup. The city offered abundance, yet only to a few. The vast majority lived in deprivation, their nutrition barely enough to sustain bodies worn thin by labor. The contrast between wealth and poverty was never more glaring than at mealtimes while affluent families dined on imported meats, exotic fruits, and delicate pastries. The poor were forced to consume what was left behind, relying on ingenuity and sheer endurance to avoid starvation. Every morsel of food was a small victory, and every missed meal a reminder of the fragile balance between life and death. Disease stalked the streets with silent inevitability. The cramped, poorly ventilated homes of the working class, combined with contaminated water and polluted air, created perfect conditions for epidemics. Cholera, typhoid, tuberculosis, and influenza claimed thousands each year, often striking suddenly and leaving little time for treatment. Hospitals were overcrowded, underfunded, and intimidating, offering only the barest chance of survival, while home remedies and prayers were often the only recourse for families too poor to afford care. The Thames, once the city's lifeline, had become a conduit for disease, carrying human and industrial waste alike. Sewer systems were incomplete, and drainage was insufficient, leaving fetid pools in which bacteria thrived. Even minor cuts or bruises could become fatal infections, and mortality rates among children were tragically high. Those who survived learned caution, hygiene where possible, and vigilance in all aspects of daily life. But the risks were constant and unavoidable. The working environment compounded these threats. Factories, docks, and workshops were arenas of danger, where physical injury was common and sanitation was minimal. Dust, soot, and chemical fumes infiltrated lungs, leaving many with chronic illness. Machinery, poorly guarded and often faulty, maimed hands and limbs with alarming regularity. Child laborers faced the harshest conditions, crawling beneath operating machinery, carrying heavy loads, or performing repetitive, dangerous tasks for hours on end, with exhaustion masking their pain. Employers frequently ignored safety concerns, prioritizing output over lives. Yet the city depended on this labor. Its commerce, industry, and daily functions were sustained by the relentless toil of people whose suffering was largely invisible to those in power. Survival required resilience, ingenuity, and a measure of luck, as every day brought new risks and the potential for disaster. Nutrition and health were inseparable from class and occupation. Artisans, dock workers, and laborers had limited access to wholesome food, relying heavily on bread, potatoes, and occasional meat scraps. The wealthy, meanwhile, enjoyed diets rich in variety, supported by global trade networks and refrigeration technology, giving them both physical advantage and social leverage. The poor, compensated by scavenging, stretching meals, and employing traditional remedies, often derived from herbal knowledge or passed down practices. Malnutrition contributed to susceptibility to disease, stunted growth in children, and fatigue among adults, creating a vicious cycle where survival itself became an exhausting task. In cramped dwellings, the challenges multiplied. Families of 6 or more often shared a single room, with minimal ventilation and scarce heating during bitter winters, and yet they persevered, finding warmth in shared beds, layered clothing, and improvised hearths. Public health initiatives were nascent and often reactive rather than preventative. The city's authorities recognized the dangers only after epidemics had ravaged populations. The construction of sewer systems, introduction of clean water sources, and regulation of housing gradually improved conditions. Yet for many, change was slow or insufficient. Municipal reformers documented the squalor, seeking both awareness and legislation, while charitable organizations distributed food, medicine, and clothing, attempting to bridge the vast gap between affluence and poverty. These efforts, though crucial, could not erase the daily threats faced by the majority, and survival remained a constant negotiation between human ingenuity and environmental hazards. Street life itself posed risks beyond hunger and disease. Crime, both petty and violent, was a constant reality for those navigating the city's alleys and thoroughfares. Pickpockets, thieves, and gangs thrived in crowded markets, dimly lit corners, and fog-shrouded streets. Women faced additional dangers, particularly those working outside the home or in service roles. Harassment, assault, and exploitation were everyday threats. Children were especially vulnerable, often forced to sell goods or beg on the streets, balancing the need to earn with the risk of violence. Knowledge of the city, keen observation, and quick reflexes were as essential for survival as strength and stamina. Workhouses offered another form of survival, though at a high social cost, intended as a last resort for those unable to support themselves. They were infamous for harsh discipline, poor food, and grueling labor. Families were often separated, privacy was non-existent, and the stigma attached to admission reinforced the social divide. Yet, for some, the workhouse provided shelter and sustenance that could not be found elsewhere. A grim alternative to the streets. Its existence reflected the harsh pragmatism of Victorian society. Survival was possible, but only under strict conditions that demanded conformity and submission. Despite these hardships, the human spirit endured. Families formed tight bonds, sharing resources, labor, and support. Neighbors looked out for each other, offering aid when illness, accident, or misfortune struck. Communities organized around churches, charities, and informal networks, creating pockets of resilience that allowed life to persist even in the harshest conditions. Children played in alleys and courtyards, finding joy in small games and fleeting moments of freedom, while adults found laughter, music, and camaraderie amid the daily grind. Survival was not merely a matter of enduring threats, but of preserving humanity, humor, kindness, and hope in a world that tested every ounce of strength. Domestic toil and street-level navigation were interwoven, forming a complex web of survival that defined life in Victorian London. Success meant endurance, strategy, and cooperation, with each individual contributing to the city's pulse, whether through work, trade, or family care. Those who survived did so through adaptability, community, and sheer resilience. Finding meaning in small triumphs, a meal secured, a child protected, a day completed without injury or illness. These victories, though invisible to the wealthy or powerful, were monumental in the daily reality of life in London. By evening, the city began to shift again, signaling the end of work for many, but the beginning of new challenges. Hunger persisted, illness lingered, and fatigue pressed heavily on all who had labored through the day. Families returned to cramped homes, children were bathed and fed as best possible, and fires were stoked to provide warmth. Streets emptied gradually as lamps flickered to life, casting long shadows over cobbles and alleys, reminding all that darkness brought new dangers. Survival in Victorian London was not a linear journey, but a cycle repeated daily. Wake, labor, endure, rest, and prepare to repeat. In this relentless pattern, resilience became instinct, community became necessity, and hope became the invisible thread holding together the lives of millions. As the day progressed and the shadows shifted across the crowded streets of Victorian London, the city's relentless rhythm continued to test the endurance of its inhabitants, revealing a complex interplay between suffering, perseverance, and the occasional glimmers of hope that allowed millions to carry on in conditions that would break lesser spirits. Life in this sprawling metropolis was defined not by comfort or stability, but by the constant negotiation between scarcity and necessity, danger and survival, where each individual navigated a world in which hunger, disease, exhaustion, and social pressure were daily constants. Yet human ingenuity, compassion, and resilience provided an invisible safety net that allowed life to persist. The working poor awoke early, their bodies already fatigued from previous days of labor, to perform tasks that demanded physical strength, mental acuity, and sometimes sheer courage, whether hauling coal to factories, cleaning streets slick with mud and refuse, selling goods in overcrowded markets, or operating machinery that could maim without warning. Their movements were calculated, precise, and honed by repetition. Each step a small act of defiance against the relentless pressures of a city indifferent to their suffering. Hunger remained an omnipresent challenge, shaping behavior, decisions, and relationships. Mothers stretched meager portions into meals. Children scavenged for scraps in alleyways or begged from strangers, and adults endured long hours without Nourishment. Each person forced to ration strength and patience to survive until the next opportunity to eat, while the wealthy dined without awareness of the hardships endured just beyond their doors. Disease, an invisible predator, permeated every corner of the city. Cholera, typhoid, tuberculosis, and influenza thrived in the overcrowded, poorly ventilated homes of the working class, claiming countless victims annually. The Thames, once a source of sustenance, had become a conduit for contamination, its waters thick with sewage and industrial runoff. Sanitation was inconsistent at best, and medical knowledge remained limited, leaving families to rely on home remedies, prayer, and charity to stave off illness. The fear of infection was constant. Even minor injuries could become fatal, and the knowledge of this danger influenced behavior, routes taken through the streets, and interactions with others. Survival demanded vigilance, adaptability, and, often, a degree of stoicism, as the cost of vulnerability could be measured in suffering or death. Labor, the engine of the city, took an enormous toll on physical and mental well-being. Factories, docks, and workshops were sites of relentless toil, where men, women, and children labored for long hours with little reward. Machinery was dangerous, supervision harsh, and safety measures minimal. Women in textiles, domestic service, and other trades worked bent over looms, ironing boards, or stoves, while men carried heavy loads, operated complex equipment, or endured hazardous conditions in shipyards and foundries. Children performed tasks requiring dexterity and courage beyond their years, navigating hazardous streets and workplaces, often while fatigued and undernourished. Yet within these challenges, solidarity emerged. Workers supported one another, shared small comforts, and developed networks of aid that helped them endure, forming communities within the very environments designed to exploit them. The domestic sphere was equally fraught with hardship. In affluent homes, domestic laborers maintained appearances of order and gentility, yet their own lives were controlled by the demands of those they served, leaving little room for personal respite or autonomy. In working-class homes, survival required constant effort. Cooking, cleaning, mending, and child-rearing were unending, compounded by overcrowding, inadequate heating, and limited access to clean water. Illness, fatigue, and social pressures weighed heavily on families, yet they adapted, finding creativity in meal preparation, resourcefulness in clothing repair, and ingenuity in maintaining some semblance of comfort and dignity despite harsh circumstances. Household endurance was an intricate balance, and the ability to navigate it often determined the difference between survival and tragedy. Education, though limited for many, offered a fragile hope of escape from poverty. Schools were strict, classrooms crowded, and instruction often rote, but literacy and numeracy provided opportunities for slightly improved work and social mobility. Teachers, themselves underpaid and overworked, guided children through lessons while managing discipline in conditions that could be chaotic and challenging. Children's engagement with education was intermittent, as economic necessity often forced them into labor. Yet even sporadic learning gave families a chance to aspire beyond immediate survival, offering a vision of a life less dictated by deprivation. Community and religion played a critical role in sustaining resilience. Churches, Chapels and charitable organizations offered spiritual guidance, practical support, and social cohesion. Volunteers distributed food, clothing, and medical care, while neighbors assisted one another with childcare, work, and illness. These networks, though often fragile, provided a lifeline in a city otherwise dominated by struggle, reinforcing bonds of solidarity and reinforcing the human capacity to endure despite adversity. Festivals, fairs, and communal gatherings offered rare opportunities for joy, celebration, and reprieve, allowing even the poorest citizens to experience moments of relief from their relentless labor and deprivation. The city's architecture mirrored its social and economic divides. Grand townhouses, government buildings, and theaters towered above narrow alleyways, tenements, and slums, a constant visual reminder of the gap between wealth and survival. Laborers, street vendors, domestic workers, and children sustained the functioning of the metropolis while remaining largely unseen, their efforts invisible to those who benefited most from their labor. The grandeur of public buildings and private estates depended entirely on the perseverance and endurance of these countless individuals. Survival required not only physical strength, but the ability to navigate social hierarchies, anticipate danger, and seize fleeting opportunities to improve circumstances. However, incrementally, by late afternoon, the city's energy remained palpable. Markets buzzed, workshops hummed, and children returned from school or labor to assist with household chores. Exhaustion weighed heavily on all, yet human resilience was remarkable. Laughter, music, storytelling, and small gestures of kindness persisted, threading hope into the fabric of daily life. The capacity to endure adversity, to find moments of connection and joy, and to preserve one's dignity amid constant pressure was a defining characteristic of Londoners across classes. Survival was both necessity and art, a continuous negotiation between external pressures and internal resolve. As evening approached, the city shifted again, transitioning from labor to leisure, commerce to social interaction, and public spaces to private ones. Workers returned home, exhausted but unbroken, seeking warmth, nourishment, and companionship. The wealthy prepared for theaters, salons, and private gatherings, often unaware of the toil that sustained their lifestyles. Streets emptied gradually, replaced by gas lamps casting long shadows and fog curling through alleyways, a reminder that survival extended into the night when dangers, both visible and invisible, persisted. Those who had endured the day now faced the challenges of domestic management, communal support, and personal health, demonstrating that survival in Victorian London was continuous and unrelenting, requiring both stamina and strategic navigation of social, physical, and moral landscapes. Through the hardships of hunger, disease, and labor, hope endured in small but powerful ways. Families relied on one another, neighbors shared resources, and communities fostered solidarity. Children's laughter, whispered prayers, shared meals, and moments of rest provided sustenance for the spirit, complementing the physical necessity of food and warmth. Human endurance, adaptability, and compassion were the hidden forces sustaining the city, allowing life to persist against all odds. Survival was not simply an act of avoidance or compliance, but a dynamic, ongoing process of engagement with the environment, the community, and one's own resilience. In the final hours of daylight, Victorian London revealed the cumulative impact of countless individual struggles and triumphs. Every laborer, domestic worker, street vendor, child, and family contributed to the pulse of the city, sustaining its machinery, commerce, and social structure. Their efforts, often invisible to the elite, formed the backbone of the metropolis. Survival was not merely endurance, but an active, creative engagement with the challenges of daily life, blending strategy, hope, and determination in ways that ensured the continuity of existence in a city that demanded resilience at every level.